Harrison Ford wasn't supposed to be Indiana Jones. He wasn't the first choice. He wasn't the second choice. Steven Spielberg wanted him. George Lucas shut it down. Tom Selleck got the part. He wore the hat. He did the screen test. The role was officially his. Then a television network made a 3-word decision that rewrote cinema history. And with less than 3 weeks until cameras rolled, a script showed up at Harrison Ford's front door with one instruction: read it in an hour. But to understand how the most iconic casting in adventure cinema almost never happened, you have to go back to a beach. May 1977. The Mauna Kea Hotel in Hawaii. George Lucas is sitting on the sand, convinced his career is over. Star Wars just opened, and Lucas doesn't want to be anywhere near Hollywood when the numbers come in. He's certain the film is a disaster. Sitting next to him is Steven Spielberg, who just wrapped Close Encounters of the Third Kind and needs a vacation from his own obsessions. These two men, one terrified of failure, the other restless for a new challenge, start building a sandcastle together like a couple of kids. And then a phone call changes everything. It's from the head of marketing at 20th Century Fox. Star Wars isn't a disaster. Star Wars is a phenomenon. Box office records are falling. Lines are wrapping around city blocks. Lucas hangs up the phone, and for the first time in months, he's laughing. The next morning, still buzzing from the news, they sit on the beach again. Spielberg tells Lucas he's always wanted to direct a James Bond film, but the Bond producers rejected him, told him his style was too juvenile. Lucas grins and says he's got something better than Bond. He starts talking about a character he's been developing since 1973. An archaeologist who hunts ancient artifacts, gets into fistfights, and narrowly escapes death in every act. A guy named Indiana Smith. Spielberg loves the concept instantly. But the name? Smith has to go. Lucas shrugs and says, fine, call him Jones. That sandcastle conversation produced a $2 billion franchise. But the man who would become Indiana Jones wasn't part of the discussion. He was 3,000 miles away, and nobody was thinking about him yet. By 1979, Lucas and Spielberg were deep into pre-production. Lawrence Kasdan wrote the screenplay. Paramount signed off on a $20 million budget, the only studio willing to meet Lucas and Spielberg's contractual demands. The shooting schedule was set for summer 1980, with principal photography planned at Elstree Studios in London and on location in Tunisia, La Rochelle, and Hawaii. Spielberg, coming off the bloated production of 1941, was determined to shoot fast and lean. Under 80 days, like the B-movies that inspired the whole project. Everything was moving forward. Except they didn't have their leading man. Spielberg's first instinct was Harrison Ford. He'd seen what Ford could do in Star Wars. The swagger, the timing, the ability to sell a ridiculous situation with a straight face. But when Spielberg brought Ford's name to Lucas, the answer was immediate and firm. Lucas had already cast Ford in American Graffiti, Star Wars, and The Empire Strikes Back. 3 films. He told Spielberg he didn't want Ford to become his regular. His exact words referenced the Scorsese-De Niro partnership. He wanted a fresh face, someone audiences wouldn't associate with another franchise. Lucas envisioned doing what the Bond producers had done with Sean Connery: find an unknown, build a star from scratch, lock him into a multi-picture deal. So they went looking. The casting calls were wide. Tim Matheson came in. Peter Coyote read. John Shea auditioned. Chevy Chase was considered, physical comedy background, Weekend Update persona. Steve Martin's name floated through the room. Bill Murray was on a list somewhere. Even Jack Nicholson was approached and passed. But of all the actors who walked through that door, one stood out. A tall, mustachioed television actor who just filmed a pilot for CBS. Tom Selleck walked onto the audition stage, put on the fedora and the leather jacket, and the room went quiet. His screen test was performed opposite Sean Young, and they ran the bar scene, the first meeting between Indy and Marion. Lucas later called them both terrific. Spielberg agreed. The chemistry was there. The physicality was there. Selleck had the jawline, the charm, the ability to shift between humor and intensity. The decision was unanimous. Tom Selleck was Indiana Jones. The role was officially offered. Selleck accepted. And then the dominoes started falling. Selleck, being exactly the kind of professional who would later define his career, told the producers something most actors wouldn't have. He told them about the CBS pilot. Magnum PI had tested well. There was a chance CBS would pick it up for a full series. He wanted to be transparent about the potential conflict. Lucas and Spielberg weren't worried. They had leverage. They were two of the hottest filmmakers in Hollywood, coming off 4 consecutive cultural earthquakes between them. They called CBS and asked for Selleck to be released for the duration of the Raiders shoot. CBS said no. Not just no, they refused to negotiate. They refused to hold production on Magnum until after Raiders wrapped. They refused to even consider a compromise. They had a pilot with strong numbers and an actor they believed could anchor a hit show, and they were not going to let him walk away for a movie, not even a Spielberg-Lucas movie. Spielberg and Lucas held the offer open for about a month, hoping CBS would budge. They didn't. Selleck later recalled that the more they pushed, the more CBS dug in. And here's the cruel irony that makes this story sting. By the time Magnum PI was ready to begin filming, a Hollywood actors' strike delayed production. Raiders, shooting in London and Tunisia, far from union jurisdiction, was free to proceed. Selleck could have done both. He could have been Indiana Jones and Thomas Magnum. But by then, the part had already gone to someone else. It was now June 1980. Filming was set to begin within weeks, and the most anticipated adventure film of the decade had no lead actor. Spielberg found the answer at a screening. He watched an advance cut of The Empire Strikes Back and saw Harrison Ford deliver the performance that sealed it. Han Solo, trapped in the carbon-freezing chamber, Leia telling him she loved him. Ford looked at her and said 2 words that weren't in the script. He'd improvised the line after director Irvin Kershner had him try multiple variations. That moment, that instinct, told Spielberg everything he needed to know. He picked up the phone and called Lucas. Ford is the guy. Lucas pushed back again, the Bobby De Niro argument, the repetition concern, the worry that audiences would just see Han Solo in a hat. But Spielberg was done waiting. Time was running out. The sets were being built. The crew was assembling. He needed someone who could carry a franchise, and he needed that person now. Lucas finally relented. He called Harrison Ford directly and told him a script was coming to his house. Read it in an hour. Ford sat down and read it. 1 hour later, Lucas told him to drive to Spielberg's house. Ford had never met Steven Spielberg before that afternoon. They talked, they played pinball, they went through the character, the tone, the vision. By the time Ford left the house, he had the job. 3 weeks before cameras rolled. The entire trajectory of the franchise, 5 films, billions of dollars, one of the most recognized fictional characters in history, hinged on a CBS executive saying no to a scheduling request. If you think stories like this deserve to be told, stories Hollywood tried to bury under decades of polished press kits, hit subscribe. Because what happened next, on set, was even wilder. Ford and Spielberg flew from Los Angeles to London together. It was a 10-hour flight, and they spent every minute of it going through the script line by line. By the time they landed at Heathrow, they'd refined the character, tightened dialogue, reshaped scenes. Ford wasn't just an actor showing up for work. Spielberg recognized a collaborator, someone with sharp story instincts and a willingness to fight for what worked. Principal photography began in late June 1980 at Elstree Studios. The energy was electric but chaotic. A fire during the production of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining had damaged one of the stages, so the schedule was rearranged. They'd start on location instead of on the sound stages. The first major location was La Rochelle, France, where they filmed the submarine sequences using an actual U-boat borrowed from the German production of Das Boot. From there, the production moved to Tunisia, standing in for Egypt. And Tunisia is where Raiders of the Lost Ark became a survival story as much as a production. Temperatures hit 130 degrees. 600 Arab extras began to complain when the water supply ran into problems. Equipment failed in the heat. Sand got into everything: cameras, lenses, costumes, food. Spielberg, working at a pace that bordered on manic, was averaging 35 setups a day, an almost unthinkable number for a Hollywood production. But he made a promise to himself. No more ballooning budgets, no more endless shoots. He would bring this in fast, like the B-movie serials that inspired it. George Lucas visited the Tunisia set for 2 weeks, and even shot some second-unit footage himself. On his very first day, he got so badly sunburned that he had to wrap his face and ears in tissue paper. The crew started calling him Howard Hughes. But the real crisis was biological. Dysentery swept through the production like a plague. Almost everyone got sick. Cast, crew, extras. The only person who escaped was Spielberg himself, who had brought his own food supply in cans. He ate nothing local. Meanwhile, Harrison Ford was running to the bathroom every hour and trying to perform complex action sequences in between. This brings us to day 34 of the Tunisia shoot, and a scene that was supposed to take a day and a half to film. The script called for an elaborate fight between Indiana Jones and a swordsman in the streets of Cairo. A highly choreographed sequence with whip work, footwork, and multiple camera angles. Stuntman Terry Richards had trained extensively for the fight. The blocking was set. The crew was ready. But Ford was not. He was deep into his 5th week of dysentery. He could barely stand for extended periods. The night before the shoot, Ford and Spielberg did a brief rehearsal and both came to the same realization: this sequence would take 2 or 3 days they didn't have. It was the last thing left to shoot in Tunisia before they moved to England. Ford walked up to Spielberg and said the words that would create one of cinema's most beloved moments. He told him he couldn't do the fight. Spielberg had been thinking the same thing. So they changed the plan. When the cameras rolled, Richards performed his impressive sword display. Ford looked at him, pulled out his revolver, and shot him dead. One take. The crew burst out laughing. It wasn't just a great gag. It saved them an entire day of shooting, putting the production ahead of schedule on what had been their most brutal location. Terry Richards, who had spent weeks training for his big moment, had to be told his elaborately rehearsed fight scene was now a single gunshot. Ford later said that breaking the news to Richards was one of the hardest conversations on set. But the improvisation didn't stop there. Ford threw himself into the physical work with an intensity that surprised even the stunt team. He spent 2 weeks learning the whip, lashing himself repeatedly until he mastered the timing. He convinced Spielberg to use the whip far more than the script originally called for. During the flying wing airplane fight sequence in Tunisia, the scene where Indy battles a massive German mechanic near spinning propellers, Ford performed most of the action himself. In one take, his foot slipped in the sand and shot sideways, nearly sending him into the path of the aircraft wheel. The stunt coordinator froze. The safety team moved in. Ford got up, brushed the sand off his knees, and walked back to his mark. Nobody called cut. Nobody suggested a stunt double. That was Ford's philosophy from day one. He wanted his face in the middle of the action, not the back of a stuntman's head. He believed fear was part of the character. If the audience could see the decisions happening in real time, see the panic and the triumph registering on a real human face, they'd connect with Indiana Jones on a level that no amount of choreography could manufacture. Production wrapped in 73 days. Under schedule. On budget. Spielberg had done what no one thought possible. He'd taken a $20 million adventure film across 4 countries on 3 continents, and brought it home clean. When Raiders of the Lost Ark opened on June 12, 1981, it didn't just succeed. It detonated. The film became the highest-grossing picture of the year with $384 million worldwide. It earned 9 Academy Award nominations and won 5. Critics called it the definitive adventure film. Audiences came back again and again. And Harrison Ford, the guy who wasn't the first choice, who got the call 3 weeks before filming, who showed up at Spielberg's house never having met the man, became the most iconic action hero of his generation. Tom Selleck went on to star in Magnum P.I. for 8 seasons, becoming the biggest television star of the 1980s. He never publicly expressed bitterness. Years later, he said signing that CBS contract was the best thing that ever happened to him. And somewhere in the back of all this, behind the billion-dollar franchise, the 5 sequels, the fedora, the whip, the theme music that John Williams composed like a battle cry, there's a beach in Hawaii. 2 men building a sandcastle. One of them terrified his career is over. The other one just got rejected by the James Bond producers. Neither of them knows who will play the character they're about to create. They don't know it yet, but the wave is coming, and the castle is going to hold.